of peace in Europe. How can it be used today? And actually, I'm very happy to be moderating this discussion because it's something that is very close to me. I have a German father and a French mother, and when my mother told her father that she's going to marry a German, his father told her that, do you realize your children are going to be German? and well, I think a huge change in people's mindsets, in the mindsets of French people and of German people has occurred with 2 or 3 generations that passed. So it's a kind of a miracle, and I think it can be an inspiration for many other cases on the European continent where a work of peace building, of increasing mutual understanding, of building friendship needs to be done. And we're really honored to have the best speakers ever to speak about this topic here with us today. We have Markus Ingenlath, General Secretary of the French-German Youth Agency, which is actually one of the main tools which is used to build this French-German friendship. So thank you very much, Mr. Ingenlath, for being here. And then we have Mr. Florent Parmentier, Sciences Po professor and also associate researcher in HEC, specialized in European affairs and representing the French and EU perspective on this matter. And then we have Dmitry Suslov, professor in the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, who came specially from Moscow, so thank you very much for being with us today as well. And Ilyas Gribnikov, I pronounce your name in a Russian manner, sorry. Although you're German, you have also part of your history in Russia, right? Of your family history.
My soul is French.
So Ilya will talk us about his initiative of German-French Young Leaders Program, which gives some new power to this French-German project of friendship and lasting cooperation. So I would like to applause one more time all our speakers. And I will give the floor to Mr. Ingenlath, who will start to answer this question. How can the German-French experience of building friendship, cooperation be used today in Greater Europe?
Merci. Thank you very much. Спасибо большое. Здравствуйте. Bonjour. Hello to you all. I'm very delighted to be invited today to your conference, and since I also have some experience with the 3 countries or 3 languages we have today, I wondered whether to perhaps even prepare something in French, something in Russian, something in English. But I stuck to English today. Despite the transition from so-called hereditary enemies to a closer cooperation, German-French relations are not to be seen as role models for other states. That's my first statement. We always speak not from a role model, but of inspiration for other countries, as the two countries have their very own history and geopolitical context. It is therefore not possible to copy their approach to solve problems in other conflicts regions around the world and also in Europe. However, if one studies the history of the two neighbors, France and Germany, more closely, and if one takes a look at the reconciliation process, one may find two important aspects. First, German-French relations are a great source of inspiration and encouraging proof that the conflict, once considered almost insurmountable, can not only take a peaceful turn, but also, under certain circumstances, evolve into an anchor for peace and prosperity. Second, German-French relations have created a box of bricks, box of tools, of most diverse and specific instruments for understanding and cooperation, which represents to this very day the glue between these two very different countries and very different cultures. Some of these experiences and instruments which have been arising from German-French relations since the end of World War II will be presented in the following presentation. First, civil society has played and continues to play a fundamental role in the development of German-French relations since the end of the Second World War. Long before the Élysée Treaty was signed in 1963, it were the citizens of both countries who, on the basis of civil society structures, called for a dialogue and immediate initiatives to bring about reconciliation. Among these citizens were, for instance, French resistance fighters who had survived internment in concentration camps and were influenced by their experiences, pushed for an active dialogue with their German neighbors. Hence, during the first few years after the Second World War, German-French encounters were organized among students, journalists, clerics, and other occupational groups with the aim of creating mutual trust. That was the very beginning, mutual trust. Twin towns have been created since the 1950s to promote direct and regular meetings between the country's citizens. Today, there are over 2,400 twin city meetings. That means about 4,800 towns and even little villages who are in an active, more or less active relationship with each other. Second, the Élysée Treaty is not a standard bilateral treaty, but one that underlines the profound, far-reaching and visionary political will of de Gaulle and Adenauer. And even though not all of the elements of the treaty could be successfully implemented, the contractually regulated and regularly held consultations between the government and the founding of the French-German Youth Office continue to be decisive and formative elements of this treaty, which still shape their relationship to this day. Third, the founding of the French-German Youth Office alone as an autonomous organization, we are an international organization. When I was named Secretary General, some of my friends joked, you are going to be a colleague of Ban Ki-moon. Therefore, it's called was the Secretary General of this international organization. So this founding of this international organization, as well as the endowment of this institution, with around about 10 million euros from each side, it was an enormous sum for the 60s, so it was at that time the Franc Français in Lima, offered 8.5 million participants since 1963 to participate, and this was really a very peaceful exchange and very great extent. And Today, it still offers around about 200,000 of young citizens each year the opportunity to discover the culture and the language of their neighbor, together with their neighbor. They get aware of their cultural differences so that each side can see its own culture more profoundly through the eyes of the other and get to know it from a different perspective. An important element, albeit that is not exploited enough in the relationship between the two countries, is the instrument of intercultural learning and intercultural research, which researchers and partner organizations have been developing since the late 1960s under the overall control of the FGYO. I use this abbreviation for French-German users. Intercultural learning and research have become central elements in our educational exchange programs because the goal is to learn, to understand cultural differences, to avoid immediate judging of unaccustomed and unsettling modes of behavior, and to understand them in terms of their causes and in relation to their historical, social, political, sociological, and economical backgrounds. This means, first of all, resisting intuition and one's own cultural values, and then to engage in a debate with my neighbor about his culture. At the same time, intercultural competence offers a new and profound way of getting to know one's own culture because the alien culture serves as a mirror, providing new and surprising ways of accessing one's own familiar culture. The instrument of cultural learning is also supported by special handling of language and the principle of reciprocity. Always reciprocity of the visit, because this is from a pedagogical point of view very important. One, you are the host, and then the other way around, you are the guest. And language is also very important because we know in the intercultural process it's important not to express only in English, but in your own language. You're going more into deep. Then, this box of tools has already proven the reality test in the European context. The work done by the Franco-German Youth Office in the Balkans, in a region where the wounds of war have still not healed, direct dialogue among young Serbs and Albanians, Macedonians, Bosnians and Kosovars holds, in fact, one of the few promises of success to a peaceful society in the future. Young Albanians and Serbs are unable to meet in northern Kosovo. Their communities remain irreconcilable, but the young see their chance for dialogue to the anger of extremists on both sides and often show strong commitment in the process. Together with young Germans and French, they consider possible ways of moving on in the future and discuss the contribution they might take to a future Europe. With every encounter and every often difficult conversation, they have self-esteem and freedom to shape their future growth, and they are less vulnerable to political manipulation. They form their own opinion about the other and are certain that dialogue is possible. Herein you may find the reason why reconciliation, understanding and dialogue depend above all on civil courage and involvement. Good neighborly relation can only exist where there is a lively, constructive and peaceful dialogue among citizens. And on the basis of a joint declaration on the establishment of the Regional Youth Cooperation Office of the Western Balkans, very long title, called RYCO in the abbreviation, RYCO, RYCO, Regional Youth Cooperation Office, signed during the Western Balkans Summit in Vienna last year. The Prime Ministers of Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Macedonia, Montenegro and Serbia installed a working group with the task to elaborate concrete proposals for the missions, structures, activities and financing of this working office. And This was facilitated, this process, by the FGYO, the Franco-German Youth Office. And yeah, finally, I'm not sure whether you mentioned this, on the 4th of July, the Western Balkan 6 participants during the Paris Summit here in Paris signed a RICO agreement with the 6th Prime Minister and the RICO statute. They were also concretely inspired by this Franco-German reconciliation process. We are now about to set on a process to get this work. Other documents like budget proposals and so on. Budget was also evidently taken by itself, so a very huge sum, over €1 billion, that into work. And we are now looking forward that this organization will work from the 1st of January on. The conclusion. First, interpersonal relationships, and this is a distinct lesson learned from the German-French relationship, play a central role in the communication process. No interstate treaty weighs so heavily upon us as a personal encounter, especially when it takes place across language boundaries. And no political symbolism has the power or the magic of mutual personal discoveries and understanding. This is perhaps the most important insight to be gained from French-German relationship. Without direct encounters and dialogue involving people, a process of reconciliation cannot succeed. This kind of encounter may be difficult, sometimes even frustrating and tedious, and face the threat of setbacks again and again, but they are in fact the only road to success. The second, other central lesson from German-French relationship is that fostering dialogue among citizens, sustainable and on a broad basis, requires political support from politicians who are courageous enough to overcome prejudice and negative feelings, and who are prepared to approach the other country despite problems that exist. And with the Regional Youth Cooperation Office in the Balkans, we saw the politicians need to be courageous enough to involve also civil societies, because the civil society was from the beginning in the working group on the establishing process, and you know there are huge distance between sometimes politicians and civil society. And they were also courageous enough to let youth ministries in the lead, not the diplomats. That was the youth ministry. So those ministries which are normally in a very low level of the esteem of government, they were in the lead, and of course diplomats, they later fixed the international treaties. But it was really the other way around we broke. And third, German-French relations demonstrate the central necessity of integrating above all the young generation creatively into the communication process. This is a long-term challenge whose success also depends on whether the young generation is really granted the freedom to shape events. And this generation merely a symbolic, is this generation merely a symbolic fig leaf with which our political leaders adorn themselves, or do people genuinely trust it and grant it the freedom to act in shaping dialogue and understanding and hence political activity? 2. We need active and courageous citizens on the one hand, and active and courageous politicians on the other, for in this combination, negative relationships can be transformed into constructive, peaceful and beneficial relationships for all sides involved. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ingenlath, for this very inspiring and concrete speech. Now we already start having tools to understand how it actually was done and what maybe should be done in other problematic situations. Now I would like to give the floor to Florent Parmentier, professor in Sciences Po and associate researcher at HEC.
Thank you very much. Maybe if we start to think about the French and German reconciliation as a model for Europe, for Greater Europe, I would first, you have to thank the organization and for the invitation and the panel. But beyond that, maybe we need to address three main issues. The first issue is what is at stake when we deal with reconciliation. The second issue is how can the reconciliation process work in Greater Europe. And the third issue would be when you know what is reconciliation, when you know how it can work, and what are the processes that are in the making. Third question would be what was the perspective for a French-German type of reconciliation in Greater Europe. And let me start with the question, what is at stake when we deal with reconciliation? Reconciliation, as we said, actually is opposed to resentment and distrust. That was the first thing. We have to invent a process in which we should find a way to make two different ideas or two different facts, etc., representation of the world, so to say, can exist and be true at the same time. You don't necessarily need to have the same idea in order to be reconciliated, but you have somehow to be in a context in which you can understand each other, even if you don't share actually the same ideas. That's the first thing. Reconciliation is also opposed to revenge, which is another thing, which means that you have to imagine a way in which two people or two different groups have to become friendly again after a kind of argument or disagreement. That's also another way to consider reconciliation, and you can think of reconciliation in two ways, basically. You can have some kind of internal reconciliation. That's something you have, for instance, in South Africa, when we had this Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We had something of this kind, which is internal to a country. A second kind would be external reconciliation. And in this matter, the French-German reconciliation is probably the state-of-the-art model that you can imagine. The best model that has applied over history and over probably the last 1,000 years. I don't know for before, but for the last 1,000 years, I would say that the French-German reconciliation is typically something really unique in history. What is a model? How can we say that the French-German reconciliation is a model? A model, in an etymological way, is something which is made to scale something, to make the good measure of something, and then to have a set of various things and how we can expose. The question then is, this is a set of ideas, numbers, of whatever kind of things with which you can measure, that can describe the past, the present, and the future state of something. This is what is a model, basically. And we should maybe make a difference between a model, which is something, a state of things that you can imitate, and the modeling. Modeling is the process through which you can analyze a typical way of reconciliate between various actors. A model for Europe. So when we deal with Europe, we don't deal with EU 28. No more. We know why. We don't deal neither with EU 27. We have to think about Greater Europe and how it can apply beyond that, because the history of French and German reconciliation started before actually institutional construction of the European Union. And that's something we should think about it, just because it tells that it's not only about institutions, it's about ideas, and then it comes and is translated in different kind of sets of institutions, of which the OFAGE is one of the very important things. When we think about Europe, we should think about a process of Europeanization, which means that you always have to create Europe. Basically, you don't have something and you can say, okay, full stop, I have the definition of Europe. You have a process that in which many people will contribute, and this kind of conference, this kind of organization, association, is something which contributes to this kind of Europeanization process, and that's why it's important to be here. Europe you have a kind of a double dynamics in it. You have historically a dynamic of conflicts. The European history has been conflicted for centuries, and finally, if you have a look at this, it's quite recent that a war between France and Germany is something that you can even imagine. I mean, that's something totally out of the scope. Now it's like, for your generation, it's like really obvious. For my generation, it's still obvious. My elder sister actually married a German guy, and there was no problem with that. So you can say over time that we will find some solution. But what is interesting here is the fact that we have to keep an historical overlook of history. And another thing which is European, or typically European, is the fact that you can appropriate many things that are foreign, and then you integrate in your own identity. That was true for Athens. That was true for Jerusalem. Lots of European heritage comes from areas that are beyond traditional EU 27, or even before EU 28. That was the starting point. Now, how can the reconciliation process work? I think we should keep in mind two things on this issue. First thing is that we should think reconciliation with two other categories, which are reconciliation, unity, and identity. Because if you think about reconciliation, you have to think about a previous unity or something. Reconciliation is a strong term, which means that it's not only that you recognize the other, you have to go beyond that. You have to think something which is more cohesive than what you think. And on this point, I would say that Greater Europe has to be thought in a sense that we share a common history that goes way beyond European institutions, and that's something that we should keep in mind if we want to imagine some kind of reconciliation within Greater Europe and not only within the European Union. The other thing is that we should think about identity. The French historian Fernand Braudel actually asked this question and said, what about the relation between Europe and unity? And his answer was, well, when we think about the European unity, on the political level, we will say no, most of the time. The economic level will say, well, maybe. We should think of something, some trade, etc. It can work at some times, it didn't work at other times, but culture said globally yes. And that's what is interesting in this way about reconciliation, which means that we should think about the European unity and what is common to the European, Greater Europe in a Greater European perspective. And then when you know what you share and what has been shared over time, then you can see where you can reconcile yourself. And of course, we should be aware that we have forces that will bring us together, and we have forces that will bring us separated, and that's something we should think about. For some reasons, for some resentment reasons, reconciliation is not something which is obvious. We should most of the time fight for it. It's not something natural. You have to make an effort. You have to see other people and to recognize or to acknowledge that your view is not the only one that exists, and maybe not the only one which is legitimate. That's the thing. And when you think about reconciliation, just mobilize a toolbox, which is the 3I. 3I is something that you can use, in your whole life, so I will give it to you. 3I is for identity, it stands for identity or ID, more simply. I stands for interests, and I stands also for institutions. When you think about identity or ID, you have a political vision that was inspired by the Schuman Declaration in 1950. In English, we make something such as the coming together of nations of Europe requires the elimination of the age-old opposition of France and Germany, any action taken must in the first place concern these two countries, which was the starting point of the European discourse or ideas. This is what you have. I mean, an ID, an identity which is linked to reconciliation. Another thing would be the question of institutions. We started with bringing together strategic resources, which are like coal or steel in the 1950s. We had created a process of European integrations, which main goal is to settle differences. And this is what we have, and we have others, of course, institutions that have greatly helped to make this French-German reconciliation possible. And you have the question of interest. Then you can work together when you have common interest. Maybe one of these kind of grouping that we have in Europe is the Visegrad 4, which is V4. Visegrad countries are composed by Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia. Those 4 countries had historical differences. They had sometimes efforts, even in the interwar period. And what you have now is 4 countries that have worked together after 1989, and then they have now some kind of cohesive group, not on everything, but it's quite interesting to see that this kind of reconciliation can come through ideas, will require institutions, and will require interest. But maybe the starting point will be ideas, and I think we share this point. What are the perspectives? That would be the third issue. What are the perspective for a French-German type of reconciliation in Greater Europe? Well, I think this is a crucial and central issue. If we were optimistic, which is not forbidden, I would say that sometimes the reconciled links are stronger than some links that have never been broken, which is something which may sound weird, but in a sense it shows that political motivation is ideas can have an impact on our representation and what we should do afterwards. What is interesting is that Germany has been, probably the world champion for reconciliation, and we think we deal with the French and German reconciliation, but we could have dealt with German and Israeli reconciliation. We could have dealt with the question of German and German-Polish reconciliation that occurred in the 1970s. In this perspective, Germany has a knowledge which no one would equal, since that it's one of the countries now that is probably the most that has the most positive image in the world, which you can imagine was not the case a few decades ago. And now the question is, of course, if you compare with Japan, another country that was not among the victors of the Second World War, relations are much more tense with South Korea, with China, just because the reconciliation process has not just yet started. And this is something that Europe can be proud of. I know that sometimes it's difficult to be either optimistic or proud of Europe, but I would say that in this perspective, yeah, we can say that we have brought something that can be a model for building. How can we think about the reconciliation in Greater Europe? Well, we have lots of things, unfortunately, where we can start. We can start with the Russian and Ukrainian relations. We can start with the post-Yugoslavian area. We can start with the Polish-Russian relations. What I would suggest maybe is that if we have to find a toolbox and try to make something positive and achievable in a small amount of time, I would just maybe consider the frozen conflicts that we have in Europe. When we deal with frozen conflict, these are the countries, and I know that your organization has been quite motivated with all the different questions. Frozen conflict is the separatist conflict that we had in the post-Soviet area, to quote a few, it was just after 91, it was in Georgia, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, it was about the question, the Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijan, it was about Transnistria, and then you can even consider that the question of Crimea would be such kind of a frozen conflict, which is not a proper term. I would rather say that it's an unresolved conflict than a frozen conflict, just because conflicts always evolves, and you can't just consider that they're frozen for once and then do nothing about it. What I would suggest then is to consider the case of Transnistria. Basically because Transnistria is a place where you can, don't have one ethnic group against another one. If you consider Chisinau, the capital of Moldova, has a strong Russian-speaking minority, and if you consider the other side, Transnistria, you have also a strong Romanian-speaking minority, which means that basically the main groups, the Russian, the Ukrainian, the Moldovan, are the same groups from one side of the Dniester and the other side, which means that if you think about something where you can do something and maybe use the toolbox of the French and German organization, I would say that it won't cost a lot to create a Moldovan Transnistrian Youth Office. It would not cost a lot to think about establishing a town and village relation twinning mechanism between Moldova and Transnistria, and then maybe add some other countries from Northern Europe. I don't think it would cost a lot to organize an annual prize for initiatives supporting the reconciliation process. It won't cost a lot to promote a mechanism allowing for student exchanges or a summer school of this kind that we have between the two bands. So I would say that maybe the real cost here is political motivation, and I think it's why we are there today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Florent Parmentier. I really liked your idea, your remark that sometimes reconciled links are stronger than links that have never been broken. So there is hope. Thank you. Thanks again. I would like to give the floor to our honorable guest from Russia, Professor Dmitry Suslov.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor and privilege for me to be here. And it's quite remarkable for you asking for me to give a Russian perspective on the Russian-German reconciliation, particularly given the fact that Russia was one of the reasons of German-French reconciliation, given the fact that it was Russia who compelled the fundamental transformation of Germany after 1945. And secondly, because of the threat the Soviet Union presented to Europe, which also compelled President de Gaulle and Chancellor Adenauer to come together and join forces in building a greater Europe. However, since I'm not a historian and not actually a deep expert on German-French relationship, I will talk about largely two things. First, I'll talk about the relevance of German-French reconciliation for the international relations and European situation that we are witnessing right now, including for both the European Union itself and for larger greater Europe. And secondly, the lessons that we can draw from the experience of this rapprochement or reconciliation between the two great European countries. And I will give 5 lessons, 4 of which I think are clearly applicable to the situation in creative Europe nowadays, and the 5th is less, unfortunately. So about relevance. Of course, this reconciliation and the history of this reconciliation, the results of this reconciliation, is immensely relevant these days because it still, in my understanding, maintains peace in Europe and keeps the European Union from falling apart. And this is something that few people, I think, clearly recognize today. European Union, of course, faces enormous challenges these days. It's in the deepest crisis in its history. And one of the elements of this crisis is the new role of Germany, actually, in the European Union. The profound power shift that we are witnessing today in the EU. Germany is becoming an uncontested leader in the European Union, especially after Brexit. It is Germany, not the Franco-German tandem, not the Commission, not Brussels, who is running the European Union. And the EU is withstanding all these challenges that it is facing precisely because the deep nature of the Franco-German reconciliation. Thus, the greatness and value of this reconciliation is that it turned out to be much more deep than the reasons that had created this reconciliation. And this reconciliation went much beyond the model that accompanied its establishment. Just to remind you, when this reconciliation started, France was the political leader in the emerging Franco-German tandem. This reconciliation for President de Gaulle was about French greatness through a greatness of Europe and through a greater autonomy of Europe in the global context. And it was about managing of the German problem through integration, through Germany's vanishing in the European institutions. Today, the balance of forces, the balance of power in the European Union is completely different. French role is decreasing in the EU. It is no longer the traditional Franco-German tandem. As I said, Germany is the uncontested leader, so it is not Germany vanishing in the European institutions. This is actually Germany presiding over or running those European institutions. And if not this deep societal reconciliation between the two peoples, not just the two countries and governments, this power shift could have resulted in very serious deterioration of the relations between the two. But we do not see the resurgence of hostility and hatred between Germany and France. And it is the culture of Germany and France working together which prevents this return of hostility and hatred and allows the European Union to withstand its challenges, including its internal challenges even more than external challenges. And this emphasizes particularly the importance of societal links, not just intergovernmental links. Secondly, on the more broader level, this reconciliation and the experience of this reconciliation is highly relevant because today we are witnessing other major divides in Europe, or even a series of divides in Europe, which might be even getting deeper in the future, thus putting the peace at risk in Europe. At the systemic level, there is a divide between Russia and its allies on the one hand, and the rest of Europe on the other hand. Already after the end of the Cold War, Russia was not part of the economic and security orders that started to prevail in Europe. And the terms that Russia was offered regarding its relations with that order did not suit Russia fundamentally. Now, the problem is even deeper. This order, which Russia is not part of, is consolidating partly against Russia. And there is a very visible reconsolidation of Euro-Atlantic in both security and the economy. And it not just excludes Russia, but partly against it. Look upon the current NATO posture, the results of Warsaw Summit, and so on. And this is very, very destabilizing. At the tactical level, there still are several conflicts and hostilities in Europe which threaten peace and aggravate stability. Some are older, such as between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and this is one of the frozen conflicts where there is ethnic hatred and religious hatred. And some are new, as between Russia and Ukraine. And unfortunately, we are seeing a process of consolidation of Ukraine and the emergence of Ukrainian identity on the anti-Russian level. It is also very much destabilizing. So we should think about using this Franco-German experience to overcome these conflicts and hatreds, and I'll come back to that later in the lessons part. Third, this reconciliation between Germany and France is relevant because some of the systemic reasons that brought this reconciliation to life are still very relevant today, but of course at a different level. Namely, the threat of marginalization and insecurity of Europe at large. Again, to remind you what was the factors that compelled de Gaulle and Adenauer, quite prudently and pragmatically, to start this reconciliation process. It was the challenge of insecurity and marginalization that they both felt. Just to remind you the conditions. France lost the war in Algeria. France failed in Suez crisis in Egypt. De Gaulle was very much concerned about the US-Soviet nuclear stance and the role of Europe in the changing American nuclear posture. He was very much concerned about the US shift from massive retaliation doctrine to flexible response doctrine, which means Europe is the battlefield, but neither the US nor USSR are hit by the nuclear strikes. And so, given this circumstances, de Gaulle wanted to make France stronger and greater through making Europe stronger and greater. And it is, of course, not a coincidence that de Gaulle's outreach to Germany and Adenauer was accompanied with his firm decision to create independent French nuclear deterrent at the same time, to intensify integration of the newly emerged European economic communities at the same time. So these three components, Franco-German reconciliation, French independent role in nuclear weapons, and the deepening of the European integration were the three components of de Gaulle's desire to create a stronger Europe, and Franco-German reconciliation was a necessary component and precondition for that. And today, Europe, larger Europe, is once again facing the challenges of insecurity and marginalization. International security and external environment is getting more unstable, chaotic, and insecure. We are witnessing the return of great power rivalry and outright great power confrontation at both global and regional levels. There is a pervasive destabilization of the broader Middle East, which is just starting, not ending. And given these global tendencies, both EU and Russia face a risk of marginalization in the global sense. The EU is facing the risk of becoming a junior partner of the United States. That is actually already becoming. And Russia might become a junior partner of China. And this is also the process that is already unfolding. So it is absolutely clear that we need to face these common risks, in order to face these common risks effectively, in order to overcome this threat of mutual marginalization, we need to overcome this new systemic divide in Europe, just like de Gaulle and Adenauer overcame the divide between them in 1960s to make Europe stronger and overcome that threat of Europe's marginalization. Now to the lessons. What should we and what can we draw from this Franco-German experience of reconciliation? Lesson number one, which was already mentioned here by the previous speakers, is the power of cultural diplomacy, civil society, people-to-people conflicts, and youth. In my understanding, there were two major dimensions of Franco-German reconciliation. One is top-down. It is the power of leaders, the great titans, de Gaulle and Adenauer, and it is the power of global structural factors, which compelled both sides towards each other. Some of those structural factors I've already mentioned. The others was the role of the United States, which was positive in terms of pushing Germany and France towards each other. They both belong to NATO. They both benefited from the Marshall Plan. The United States supported, at least indigenously, European economic integration, and so on and so forth. And the second component is bottom-up, which is not less important. It is the role of public diplomacy, cultural communication, civil society, people-to-people contacts, youth exchanges, educational exchanges, and so on. And even if you look upon the Élysée Treaty, which has been mentioned here, you will see that it is very much balanced in terms of this top-down and bottom-up approach, and it presumed not just the intergovernmental communications, but also strong inter-people and intercultural communications between the two. And this is a very important lesson when we now project this situation to the larger Europe and talk about Russia-EU relations, Russia-West relations in general, and even Russia-Ukraine relations in particular. Here, in Russia-West relations and Russia-Ukraine relations, we do not have overseas hegemon who will put us together and give us billions of dollars to develop joint projects. On the contrary, the United States is driving us apart, and it does it very strongly and effectively. We do not belong to a single security community, as Germany and France belongs to NATO. Instead, we belong to different military alliances and pursue, I'm sorry to say it, but we pursue adversarial military policy towards each other. And there is strengthening this adversarial component in our both military postures and contingency plans. And despite the structural factors that I mentioned above that should pull us together, we increasingly belong to different communities, different political communities, different economic communities, different spaces and different orders. The idea of 4 common spaces that has been mentioned here before the break is no longer relevant. I mean, it's very clear that Russia is largely belonging to a wider Eurasian community, and the European Union is belonging to the Euro-Atlantic community. So, given these factors, it is very unlikely that overcoming of this new European division will be conducted in a top-down way. It is simply very unlikely in the near and middle-term future. And in this context, the importance of soft power things, these bottom-up things, cultural diplomacy, youth and public diplomacy, is far greater. And this makes the events like we are having today profoundly important. This makes the performance of soft power mechanisms such as Gorchakov Foundation, to mention the Russian component of it, they simply become vital. You know, and the task that we both face is not to make a political divide that exists between us, not to make it evolve into a cultural divide and civilizational divide. Now, lesson number 2, the power of integration. I call it the power of integration. A very important form of Franco-German reconciliation was European integration. And in fact, Franco-German reconciliation is inseparable from European integration, and European integration is inseparable from Franco-German reconciliation. Resolution of this German problem through locking Germany in the integrationist processes in institutions was exactly the motto, the model of Franco-German reconciliation. How can it be used today? It can. And the solution is that regional economic integration can be a very useful tool to overcome conflicts such as the Armenia and Azerbaijan conflict, or Georgia and Abkhazia conflict, or Abkhazia and South Ossetia conflict, or Moldova and Transnistria conflict that you already mentioned. The problem is, of course, that we do not know what particular integration should be the pillar of the resolution of those conflicts. The European Union has been since more than 10 years from now favoring resolution of, let's say, Moldovan Transnistrian conflict on the basis of the European integration. Russia is impeding that, and Russia is trying to resolve that on the basis of the Eurasian integration. There are talks nowadays in Moscow about Azerbaijan joining Eurasian Economic Union in the future. So we still have to decide what kind of integration could be used, but that's the problem of European Union, Eurasian Economic Union relations. And exactly, integration might also be helpful to establish this new positive model for Russia, EU, or European Union, Eurasian Economic Union relations, and to overcome the competition for the countries in between, the common neighborhood countries. And in my deep understanding, the way to solve the Ukraine crisis is not just a Minsk agreement. It is a positive modus vivendi between the Eurasian Union and European Union, or European Union and Eurasian Economic Union. But again, we have a problem which we are unable to solve nowadays. It is that the model of integration, of the future model of integration between the European Union and Eurasian Economic Union must not repeat the previous model of relations between the European Union and Russia, which was very much unsatisfactory for Russia, and thus this model failed. Russia cannot be associated with the European Union, and Eurasian Economic Union cannot become the second European Free Trade Association vis-à-vis the European Union. Now, lesson number 3 that we can draw from the Franco-German experience is that dialogue should never be stopped. It was very clear, spelled out, and implemented in LSA agreements that the sides should start very regular dialogue, very regular communications, and this dialogue must succeed and continue despite the current problems, despite the current frictions in the relations that sides have. And this is also something that we need to keep in mind when we talk about Russia-West relations. Because usually the first thing that we do when we have problems and contradictions, we stop time. Usually we say in Russia that this is the accusations of the West, of the NATO broke the relations with Russia after the Ukraine crisis started. The United States frozen the bilateral presidential commission between Russia and the United States. European Union suspended summits and the working process of Russia-EU relations. But Russia also had such an experience in the past. Just to remind you, in 1999, when the Yugoslavian war broke out, it was Russia who cut the relations with NATO. So this is very unwise decisions on both sides. I mean, the mechanisms of communication should work no matter the troubles that we face. Now, lesson number 4. Reconciliation does not mean absolute harmony and total absence of frictions and disagreements. Indeed, if we look upon the evolution of Franco-German relations after LSA Treaty was signed, they were not harmonious. There were lots and lots of very deep contradictions between the sides, and there were lots of disagreements and even mutual irritation between the leaders. Just to point out, Georges Pompidou and Willy Brandt, for instance, who did not have very positive personal relations between them. Or another example of very serious and systemic, I would say, contradictions between France and Germany was the Germans' reunification. It was a huge challenge to President Mitterrand, to France, but the sides did manage to overcome it, precisely because the nature of reconciliation was much deeper than just intergovernmental communications, and was much deeper than just prudent reaction to the outside sources and challenges. And finally, lesson number 1, which I think is very difficult in terms of importing it to the current Russian-Ukrainian or Russia-West relations. It is that Franco-German reconciliation was based on a clear recognition, assessment, and condemnation of previous crimes and mistakes of one of the sides. German fundamental and unequivocal condemnation of its Nazi history laid the background for reconciliation with its neighbors, including France. It is still very hard to presume and expect these sorts of steps from, let's say, Russia and Poland, or Russia and Ukraine. On the contrary, you see how all the sides are very sensitive to what they call the attempts of others to rewrite history. Russia is still sticking to its narrative of history. Ukraine, Poland are sticking to their narratives of history, which are very difficult to, at least as for now, to overcome. But nevertheless, I think that reassessment of history, and here, by the way, the Russian-Polish example could be useful. Russia and Poland does have the Commission on difficult issues in history. I won't say that it was profoundly successful, but nevertheless, they tried. And in this sense, this can be used as an example of Russia and Poland using this German and French example of reconciliation, but I don't think that it would be possible, at least in the near-term future, in the Russian-Ukrainian case. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Suslov, for this very intense and speech full of information and food for thought. I think we're going to discuss during this forum many of the topics you mentioned. I would like to give the floor to Ilya Skrindikov, who will talk us about the German-French Young Leaders program.
Merci. Fox. wake up. I mean it literally, not only. It's about our future, your future. I call myself to the younger generation. We heard a lot about the great ideas about the former generations that did a lot in order to secure the peace, to build a lot in our Europe. What we're doing, I mean, my question is now, especially after the Brexit, is whether our generation is really committed to great ideas. For example, every generation has its own motivation. The first generation, let's say, the first generation of decision makers after this Second World War, they had the motivation and the commitment, the motivation for the commitment to end the war and to that it doesn't happen again, because they knew what it is. The second generation, let's say it was Kohl and Mitterrand, they were children when war happened. They knew why they are committed to European Union, why they are committed to peace. They really did a lot. They were inspired. They fought. The third generation, it's not our generation, it's the generation that is partly in power. In my view, there's something in the generation in between. They didn't experience the war, they know a lot about it. But it's quite theoretical. And our generation, that's the generation that experienced a lot, that took advantage of the freedom, of all the fruits of the European reconciled continent. But that's not the generation in power. My question is, which convictions we do have, which force is driving our commitment, your commitment? Are we ready to commit ourselves for our future? Because there was a question to the older generation, you made this mistake, so do something in order to secure our future. But it doesn't work in this sense. We saw it in Brexit, in Britain. It's not the generation that's there in order to decide things, that they will fight for our future. Do we, our generation, do enough? Are we ready to raise our voices for our future? Well, it's a general remark, but it's really to think about it. In my view, we know a lot. We read a lot. We want a lot. We travel a lot, but we're not committed in the long term. We have a lot of ideas. We do something here, something there, but we do not fight in long term, despite all these problems we have, for something greater than we experience now. Well, sorry for this short introduction. Laura asked me to present my motivation, my own commitment for the project. There's a quotation that is very dear to me. Quinon quod deficit, he who does not progress regresses. That means, for me, that it is important to know the past and to learn from the past, but we shouldn't be blocked in the past and by the past. We should also adjust old ideas to new realities. And the conference I want to speak to you about, it's a small drop in the ocean, it dealt with the common future, with the common digital future, German-French common digital future. It was initiated by the German-French Youth Office. So thank you very much, Mr. Ingelet, for your support. So my commitment is based on my own experience. My own experience in Germany, my own experience in France. What did I see? I saw that on both sides, it's nothing really negative, but it's the reality. There are more and more younger people, young professionals, who travel to and study in Asia, in America, in Africa, because we are more mobile. We are hyper mobile. We do travel to Vietnam because it's exotic, but we do not travel to the neighbor, to France, to Germany. And so the effect is that, for example, in Germany and France, we have very dynamic, smart brains that do not know the neighbor and do not speak the language of the neighbor. In the past, a lot of projects were launched between France and Germany, hundreds, thousands, but because of this ideology, I would say, but also tradition, we did it, most of them in French or in German, because the language is important. But we have this gap, the gap for younger people, young professionals, who will not go abroad anymore to France in the framework of Erasmus, so they do not learn the language of others, but they don't want to speak French. They can't really participate in platforms in French or in German. So our idea was to do it in English. It's quite a simple idea, of course, for you, but it's a very difficult idea on the political level, because of this old tradition, we do it only in French or in German. The second point was, maybe we can forward and go forward, to do it in English and to do it also on a topic that does interest everybody. So not on a German-French typical topic, because there are hundreds and thousands of platforms dealing only with the German-French history, German-French relations. We did not want to speak about it, we wanted to do it, to bring together smart brains, start-uppers, a lot of start-uppers, but also politicians and artists, and create common ideas about our digital future. We did it also in a not in a conference room, but in a company, so in smaller groups. And we had no really frontal discussions, but only mini think tanks, we called it. And we did it as grassroots as possible, so the participants themselves shared the ideas in mini groups, and then permitted the exchange between the French and German. The idea is that this conference takes once a year, and then we have side events in small groups with companies and institutions, where we work on concrete ideas and make also business plans and cultural plans, what we have to launch in France and Germany. As I said, for you it's nothing that will change the world. It's only a small step. My point is to share with you my conviction that everybody of you here shall be committed. You're young, you're such an energy. Of course you can study models and study the past, it's important. But more important is also to do something, and to launch your projects and to do on your level and in your field of interest what you think should be done, and not to give our future to the next to other generations that are not responsible for our future. So let me say that we are masters of our future, but we have to shape it. Thank you. That was short.
Thank you very much, Ilya, and I hope that we will have other such initiatives like the Russian-Ukrainian Young Leaders Program, Armenian-Azerbaijani Young Leaders Program, popping up after your speech in the heads of some of our participants to start. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. It was a very intense, a very fascinating, passionate talk that you gave us. I would like to ask the audience to applause. Now maybe some of you would like to ask some questions. I see already some hands raised. So let us start with Anastasia Kazakova.
Thank you the speakers for this really remarkable speech. I would like to ask 2 questions, if you let me. You mentioned the Franco-German reconciliation as a model, and I have a question. How is France going to react considering the fact that the role of Germany is going to be bigger after the Brexit? And does the Brexit in this way possess kind of a threat to the equal partnership with France and Germany? And the second question, could be the Franco-German reconciliation an example to other countries, as you mentioned, and I agree with it, on the post-Soviet peace. Because we see that though Russia and Ukraine, for example, have very strong ties, cultural, political, economic ties, nevertheless, we see that it is really difficult to escape this situation in the bilateral relationships that we have right now. And Monsieur Franco-German mentioned that probably the problem is that not enough political motivation. So is that the conclusion that Russia and Ukraine are not enough politically motivated to just build ties to get rid of this conflict right now? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. We will take some other questions. Vasilisa.
I think, yeah. So my question is addressed to everyone, but it will be based basically on what Mr. Suslo was saying. So this difference between bottom-up and top-down approach, and basically I'm interested in more what you said about like this bottom-up approach. So that empower needs to go from culture, from economic and business collaboration. And so my question is that what we can see right now in the recent situation, that basically the political situation blocks in some way the economical collaboration and cultural collaboration as well between the countries. So what are the steps how this bottom-up approach can actually be enforced? And what I'm particularly interested is how and what organizations or institutions can be involved in sort of initiating this bottom-up approach. Thank you very much.
Yes, Anastasia?
Thank you for your speeches. So my question is addressed mostly to Mr. Ingela and Mr. Bermantier. As far as I understood from your really interesting speeches, in the case of France and Germany, we talk about 2 powers that were had like equal economic potential and also kind of equal geopolitical potential, and the basis for reconciliation was the common interest of becoming even more powerful through cooperation. But for example, if we talk now about Georgian-Abkhazian conflict and Georgian-Abkhazian-Russian conflict, what is the reconciliation here? Should it be a reconciliation between Russia and Georgia, Georgia and Abkhazia? And what is the role, like, and we don't have this equality in economic and geopolitical sense, but we have more like a dominance of some particular countries. Is it possible at all? And if in your opinion it is possible, what should be the drivers of that? Should it be political power? Or should it be a soft civil society who starts? So it's my personal interest. Thank you.
Can you take 2 more questions? Okay. We have Anna here. Hello.
Thank you, your speakers. It was very inspiring to hear your talk and all the ideas that you gave us. I have a question about reconciliation. Well, for me, in the term, there's already conflict, which is past. And talking about Russia and the West as 2 global entities, is there actually a conflict for which there is possible to construct this reconciliation? From what are we working? You said that we don't have a side that will say that it's completely guilty of something. How an absence of political will to decide what and who actually who has the truth, or that there's a possibility of many truths. For me to have reconciliation, you have to have a conflict before that, and we are not accepting and not saying that there is a conflict where there's one, a media conflict and a conflict of ideas. How is it possible to construct something from this standing point that we have now between Russia and West?
Thank you very much, Anna. And last question from Anastasia.
Thank you. So my question will be very practical. We know personally, as volunteers of the Youth Association for Greater Europe, that in order to create projects which involve masses, and really serious financing is needed, as it was in the example of France and Germany. But now, as I could just deduct from your speech, Mr. Ingemann, political will is needed in order to finance such projects. And in our case, just from our experience, there is no political will now from Russia, from Ukraine, for example, to take the case of Ukraine. There is no political will to finance such projects. We just visited in May this year when we were trying to organize a conference in Lyon. So my question is, who could bear the burden of paying for such a project now when there is no political will, or maybe
Too little, maybe. A little.
Yeah, yes,
So you have a lot of important questions to answer. I guess, Mr. Ingemann, if you would like to have the first word.
Thank you very much. So, altogether very interesting and far-reaching questions, which are also involving, of course, that what has been said also by my colleagues here on the panel. So, first question, the balance of Germany and France endangered. First of all, don't focus, for my opinion, only on the economic issue. Of course, at the moment, Germany is stronger due to an extraordinary situation also, but there have been also other situations, historic. So in the middle 90s, I used to work for a huge manufacturer, motor car manufacturer in Germany. I heard at this time on panels, everybody, oh, this is the sick man of Europe, and it was called Germany. And so there, I would be careful to do. So, and I tell my French colleagues today, when we come to this situation, of course, there is a lot of exchange on this issue. Yeah, of course, without France in security politics, we couldn't do anything. Because, you know, we are very restricted. We have a parliamentary army system. Without the go of the Bundestag, the German parliament, there is nothing to do, and we are very thankful to the French to go to Mali, to other places, to fight also terrorism in our name. And also internal security, look at the different attacks we went through during the last weeks. It's very clear, without a very intensive cooperation on the same level, you say in German Augenhöhe, it's the same level, you can't do anything. And of course, we also see this in exchange programs, now very concrete. We have now, for instance, in the vocational training, more interest of young French to go to Germany because of the job opportunities that man offers, than the other way around. But then you have, for instance, for some reasons, more interest of some of German schools to go for some programs to France than the other way around. I think that there is always an equilibrium, and of course we have to deal with respect, and this is one of the principles of exchange between France and Germany, that we always try to have this reciprocity, I say. Also this language issue, and Mr. Skrinov, he knows already our position. Of course, for this very special project, it is important to have well-trained and high-performing young people. They can also speak English to each other. But when we are happy that young French and German can speak English to each other, but we don't want that they only speak English to each other. It should be also in the future that there is a knowledge of the other languages. The same with German-Russian relations, with German-French relations. And I give you another example. We have the Triangle of Weimar, the so-called very also important issue in Europe: Polish, French, German. Both sides, German, Polish, German, French, they are doing quite well, but we have not enough mutual language understanding between Poland and France. That this has to be developed. The same between France and Russia. It should not only be a question of specialists speaking. You need more interest. So a dialogue on the same level. And then I think it was a second issue about the difference of bottom-up and top-down approach, and is the bottom-up approach also endangered by these political situation between Russia and the West? Yes, if you don't let civil society and civil society organizations do what they want to do. And I say in the civil society sector, in a very broad context, a very broad perception, that means also schools and universities. They are, for my opinion, not the state's relation, but they are also civil society relation. And you need to give them the freedom to have an exchange what they want. You don't, and that was also a very important issue at the beginning in the French-German context, because as I told you, in the late 1940s, the exchange started between France and Germany with twinning cities, twinnings, and so on. And then in '63, over 15 years after that started, the states started to introduce a youth office. And many of the organizations, they say, oh, the state is now getting control on it. It was a huge issue in Germany and in France. And there was given this freedom to the society. So until today, also over 50 years after the creation of the French-German Youth Office, we are supporting exchange. We're only organizing a little bit of this exchange programs ourselves, but we are supporting with money when there are two partners working together, and even schools wanting to work with associations. This is according to our rules. It's possible to have exchange in every state, and the French and the German state is not really intervening in this. They are in our bodies, of course. There are the youth ministers, of course, countries, but they are not mingling into the affairs of civil societies. And I think this is a very important lesson also. Give this freedom, because the people, I'm a German, I know what means subsidiarity. The people on the local ground, on the regional ground, they know best what is to do. And third is there the equality between Georgia and Russia given. Yes, of course, they are very different powers, but I think the civil society in Georgia and the civil society in Russia, they are organized approximately the same way, and let them do that, then they can also overcome the different size of countries, and they can also overcome, I also think the different political approaches of two countries, because our progress in the Balkans at the beginning, they told us no way, they are irreconcilable because they are this. Now, after 20 years after the last war, it's the same like between Germany and France. It was also 20 years. It's a good period of time to start with a new generation, which has not really been involved in this war. It is also possible, I think, between Georgia and Russia to discuss about Abkhazia, about other things, but well, you have to prepare this very carefully. You cannot just put the people together. Then it's really could be also a nightmare. We saw it, for instance, on some efforts with it was also mentioned on Japan and Korea. They started, for instance, to imitate the school book on history, which we introduced between France and Germany, as also brokered by the French-German Youth Office. And they started first with a commission, and there was one seating of the commission, and then forever it was the last one. You really have to prepare it very carefully. You have to accompany this also very carefully, because you have to broker an intercultural learning process, and this is a very tough work. I also say intercultural learning is like university learning. It's you have really to put yourself also into question. You have to learn to look on the problem with the eyes of the other. And there are methods, linguistic methods, there are pedagogical methods, there are many other methods to let this start and to really to continue very carefully. And I say it will be also possible in a conflict of ideas. That was the fourth very important question. Yes, it's no past conflict. It is now a conflict of ideas. It's also a conflict with the weight of history. But look, between France and Germany, it was far more, from my understanding of history, far more than just 3 wars in 70 years. Beginning with 1870 or 1940, or you go more back to Louis XIV and the wars. No, that will never end. It was really also a dividing conflict of to the Roman Empire, because you have completely different culture in France compared with the culture in Germany, which was, of course, which from the Reformation and other things also. It is a deep cultural conflict, and we have to keep also in contact. And this is why I'm underlining the need to learn the other language also, to continue to learn. And it's the same with West and East. I say the 20th century we overcame this divide from the Roman Empire between France and Germany, and so France and Northern Europe. And I think the 21st century, it's now to overcome the divide of the Diocletian area in the Roman Empire, where we have Eastern Rome and Western Rome, that were also developed in completely different situation. And now I think that we have to really tackle on this, and this is why I underline again the intercultural learning. It's so important to understand the arguments, it's understand the mindset of the other side. Yeah? And we cannot only say here we are now the Western society of enlightenment. That was something I got from my time in Russia. I spent several years there. I have a huge respect also of the Russian culture, and I have to also, of course, to learn. On the other hand, I think this is now our common task between France and Germany. And the third, and the fifth and last question, from my opinion, was the political will to finance. Yes, of course, there is actually between Ukraine and Russia no political will, because it's very difficult. But then, why not to ask the European Union to broker this financing, but not in a case that one side or the other side says, okay, this is now the interest of the European Union. No, I saw in the trilateral programs we had at the Franco-German Youth Office, and we're doing also programs with Middle Eastern European countries, means French, German, and one or two countries from Middle Eastern with young people. You can speak also with Russians and also with Ukrainian on difficult issues. We can speak with Turkish and Armenian people. We also had these quadrilateral programs with them, if you really accompany them. And I think this is a good money also from the European Union invested. This is, should be, and of course, both sides, it's also important to not only to stay with European money, but also to give this the floor to the government in Ukraine, in Russia, as we did now with the Balkans. We said you cannot only depend on European structures, and they found now money. It was a very huge process, but even the Balkan states, they invest because they need to develop ownership. So you have to also find the right moment where you install more ownership from the countries involved.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ignat. I will directly pass the floor to Florent Parmentier. I think we have 20 minutes left, so.
If it's 20 minutes left, it means that we should be short. So I will focus on three main questions that were addressed. First one, is there a French complex about Germany? Which is like the elephant in the room. I think that, of course, we can say that on the economic level, the political level, the weight of Germany now is beyond the French one. But if you consider the military aspect, you cannot say that the French and German cooperation will replace, to some point, the French and UK cooperation. And that even if you consider the last white book of Germany that was written, I think, published two weeks ago, something like that, you can say that we'll have more military capacity in Germany, but you can't say that there is a strong will to become a full-team geopolitical actor in Germany. It's not on the not on the table. The question is more like, well, after all, Germany is a very healthy economic power, and to some point it should bear some responsibility that maybe were not present before, but now I think that the acceptation for the majority of actors, the international actors, would agree that Germany will stand to some point in the international coalition, and there will be no debate about that. So that's the thing. And a few years ago, we were also there was this interesting point when I think it was the Polish defense minister who explained us that for the first time in Poland's history, he was more worried that of the weakness of Germany than of the strength of Germany. It was scary. It was scary for him that Germany didn't have this kind of strength that it was required to stabilize the European continent. So, and of course, there are cycles. And at some point in the middle of the 2000s, France was a healthy player, and Germany was more difficult position. So, well, at some point, things come and come again, and that's something that we should bear in mind. A second point was about the post-Soviet space. Is there any hurry for a Russian-Ukrainian reconciliation? I think that, of course, this is something as necessary as we can, but at the same time, beyond the Minsk process or the Minsk agreement and what we can do with that, we may say that on both sides you have some political discourses in Ukraine that are really anti-Russian, and sometimes it's even said in Russian, which is more weird. And on the other side, you may also acknowledge that in Russia you also have sometimes strong anti-Ukrainian attitudes or discourses. So, but I would reverse the other way around. If you can't do some top-down relations, then you have to focus on bottom-up, and it will be very difficult. Why? Because if you just think that when we think about the issue of sanctions within the EU, it's really difficult to imagine that we can just leave the sanction and just think that there will be that everything will be okay in Kiev. What you have is something really focused on those issues. So here I would rather focus on a bottom-up approach than top-down approach for now. The third point, maybe on the I think it was a question of, well, can we reconcile Russia and the West as soon as there has been no official conflict? I think that if you read the doctrines of Russia vis-à-vis NATO, of the action of NATO vis-à-vis Russia, what you have in the White Book of Germany, then you can say that, well, there have been some kind of strong discourses, etc. But to some point, in the end, what is important is to still find a way to balance this thing. You can, sometimes like in a family, you can say very harsh things, and in the end, at the end of the day, you're still a family. So you have to compose, and maybe to some point, nobody will talk to each other, but in the end, good sense prevails, and that's the best that you can make, or the hopes that you can make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Florent Bermontier. I give the floor to Professor Dmitry Suslov.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your very thrilling, thought-provoking questions. I'll start with what you ended, the Russia-Western conflict, whether it exists or not. Of course it does. Just to remind you, after the end of the Cold War, there were at least 3 episodes when Russia and NATO were on the brink of outright war. Not just a conflict, but simply hot war. The first was in 1999, when Wesley Clark was the then Supreme Headquarters, Supreme Allied Commander-in-Chief, NATO Commander-in-Chief in Europe, gave an order to the British to open fire and to destroy the Russian paratroopers who were occupying Pristina airport. Thanks God, General Michael Jackson did not fulfill that order. The second episode was in 2008, when the Russian troops were on the offensive in Georgia. The US Vice President Dick Cheney was openly, and now it's documentally proven, yielding for US military strikes against the Russian forces in Georgia. And the third episode was when Turkey downed the Russian airplane in Syria last November. It was the first, and I hope the last, episode of outright NATO use of force against the Russian military object. Of course there is conflict, and the nature of this conflict is our fundamental disagreement about the nature of the international order, about rules of the game, about norms and foundations of the international order, and the places that Russia and the Western countries, the Western actors should occupy in this international order. And the reasons of this fundamental disagreement go back to our to the end of the Cold War, basically, because having finished the Cold War, we did not agree about what kind of international order we are living in. And each side has even very different interpretation of the end of the Cold War itself, not to mention the post-Cold War international order. So we have been living and continue to live in parallel realities. And you know, Angela Merkel is accusing Putin that he's living in an imagined world. We can say the same from the Russian perspective about the West. So it is simply a fundamental disagreement about basic notions of international order. What is right and wrong? I mean, the rules of use of force. What is sovereignty? I think the question of sovereignty has been already asked here. So what is sovereignty? What is legitimacy of regimes? Who can take decisions about sovereign regimes? Are spheres of influence a normality in a multipolar world, or they are a breach with normality, and so on and so forth. Right? I can go endlessly. And this fundamental conflict, it resembles itself. We face it in each and other problem in each and other crisis between Russia and the West. Ukraine crisis is not an exception here. The difference on the Ukraine crisis is that we took it to the extreme, and both sides made steps that exclude a chance for quick reconciliation, actually. But there is this conflict, and as long as we fail to overcome these fundamental reasons of Russian-Western clash, we will be compelled to live in crisis, in crisis situation. Now, using French-German experience, reconciliatory experience for Russian-Ukraine crisis. Yes and no. On the one hand, reconciliation, and I completely agree with what you both said, reconciliation is just not on the agenda nowadays between Russia and Ukraine. On the contrary, both sides pursue transformative agendas, meaning that each of the sides see a fundamental transformation of the opponent as a precondition for dialogue and partnership. Right? So we pursue strategies aimed at capitulation, not at reconciliation. For Russia, it is clearly the transformation of the political status quo that emerged in Ukraine after the Euromaidan and runaway of Yanukovych. For Ukraine and the West, it's the change of Putin's regime, or departure of the Putin's regime, and fundamental transformation of the Russian political system. So whether it is a repetition of French-German reconciliation, well, in French-German experience, yes and no, because if we calculate Franco-German reconciliation not from 1963, but before, it did require a fundamental transformation of one of the sides. But no, it is no in terms that since 1957, the Rome Treaties, and the 1963, the Élysée Agreement, of course, neither Adenauer nor de Gaulle required the other side to go into profound transformation and change its policies, internal policy and domestic policy, completely as a precondition for dialogue. So the situation is different. The situation is also different in terms of peculiarities of the Franco-German conflict and Russian-Ukrainian conflict. You know, France and Germany belonged to a single state only under Charlemagne. Russia and Ukraine belongs to a single state just years ago, just yesterday, you know. It is not an over-exaggeration, exists at least in the Russian ears, you know, when Vladimir Putin defines Russian and Ukrainians as the same people. The same people. You know, it can be a matter for outrage for Ukrainians, especially for nationalist Ukrainians, but it is not for the overwhelming majority in Russia. So the example that you refer to when people gonna ask you questions, do you recognize that your children will be in your case German or French, in our case, I mean, to imagine a situation in my family or in my environment or in my country when someone will ask, do you imagine that your children will be Ukrainian? It's nonsense, you know. So the situation is profoundly different, of course. I mean, in the German-French case, the societal hatred did exist. In Russian-Ukrainian case, this societal hatred never existed, but it unfortunately is emerging nowadays. And this is the problem. This is why this bottom-up approach is tremendously necessary nowadays for both sides. It is necessary for Russia because I think at the level of both state and society, we simply do not understand the processes that are taking place in Ukraine, and we misinterpret that. It is necessary for Ukrainians in order to overcome this hatred, but it's very difficult because anti-Russian sentiments are nowadays the part and parcel of the new Ukrainian emerging identity. But nevertheless, this society-to-society dialogue is extremely important. Now, final question: whether Russia is impeding this bottom-up approach, given the nature of the political regime that exists in Russia. Again, yes and no. Yes, in terms that, in sense that we are having actually the divergence of values, not because of Putin. It's even before Putin. I think actually the first Chechen War, 1994, the first Chechen War was already a very vibrant illustration of value divergence in terms of Russian development and in terms of Russian values and the Western values. Because the first Chechen War showed us that what the West usually claims to be the natural European development of Russia or Russian development as a post-imperial normal European country is viewed by the Russian people as a destruction of the country. Right? So it was much before Putin. So whereas Russia was developing in accordance to classical, I would say, pre-EU European values, classical Westphalian sovereignty, and so on and so forth, the European Union was developing according to the post-historic, post-European values, and now we are facing this reality. But no, at the same time, is that I do not think that Russia is deliberately cutting ways of impeding the dialogue between civil societies, education, tourism, and so on. I mean, visa-free travel was, is, and will be one of the major priorities of Russian Federation towards the European Union Educational exchanges, well, I work in university, and I can tell on my experience, we are paid more when we publish in the Western magazines and so on and so forth. So, and all the forms of educational interconnectedness and exchanges are welcomed by the Russian side. About the approach of Kremlin towards civil society, I do not think that the Kremlin evaporates or destroys the civil society. It destroys the ways to use civil society from abroad as a tool of Russia's transformation. That is of course. And indeed one of the stated and real purposes of, let's say, United States Information Agency and so on is to transform the society, right? To aid and to transform the other societies, including Russian society, through aid. It is transformational agenda. I mean, Condoleezza Rice, when she was the Secretary of State, she even proclaimed it officially, the transformational diplomacy, meaning that the purpose of American diplomats working in different countries, in countries abroad, was to transform those societies, not just to manage their foreign policies, but to transform. So this is what Russia is fighting against. Again, an example to you, Russia kicked out the United States, the USA. Russia prevents or impedes the Russian civil society to get American money. Are we seeing the expulsion of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung or Konrad Adenauer Stiftung from Russia? No. Why? Because they do not pursue these transformative policies, right? They support communication, they support exchange. They support dialogue, not transformation of Russia. So this is at least my interpretation of regime's policy. So you can agree with that or not. I mean, you can support these policies or not. On some points, I think the regime is overplaced. I think Dima Yakovlev law was too much. Maybe the expulsion of United States Information Agency was also too much. But nevertheless, I would not agree that the regime deliberately impedes intercultural communication or educational dialogue of civil society to civil society dialogue. Who in Russia? And my final point is, the problem with Russian approach to the civil society dialogue is that not Russia is doing something in a malway, in a wrong way, but the problem is Russia is not doing enough. Is not doing enough. The effort, the amount of money that is invested into support of those projects is extremely miserable and not sufficient. Extremely miserable and not sufficient. We've just, Anastasia Kazakova knows that we've just had a very interesting seminar in our university on Russian aid policy. It is the most ineffective dimension of Russian foreign policy that you might even imagine. The most crazy, counterproductive and simply insane dimension. It is very good that we have Россотрудничество, for instance, this federal agency for support of the compatriots and exactly the civil society to civil society. But the amount of money that Россотрудничество is provided, it allows Россотрудничество to function itself, not to implement projects. It is very good that we have Gorchakov Foundation that at least does something in terms of public diplomacy and support of dialogue. But again, the volume, if we compare the performance of Gorchakov Foundation to the performance of American institutions or German institutions or French institutions, it's black and white. The numbers are simply uncomparable. So Russia should do more and invest much more in this civil society development. Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you very much, Professor Suslov. We now have 2 minutes for Ilya to give us the final inspiration.
Thank you very much. We'll try to be short, but Professor Suslov gave a lot of examples for the worsening situation, the level of distrust between West and Russia we face today. Because of Ukrainian conflict, of course. There were some former conflicts, but this is the biggest one. Distrust. Distrust is a really potential for a bigger conflict. And you spoke about it, there's still military doctrine. It worries. But how to proceed? There were a lot of questions. What should we do? The first step, and that's the German position always, we have to stick to the rules we have already. That's why Minsk II is so important. We have to implement the rules we have. Let me be quick on the European Union. The creation of European Union was also through it we wanted to create trust, because we created common institutions and shared sovereignty. Shared sovereignty was something unique. We have a common code that rules upon states, and thousands of decisions of a court are implemented by the members of the European Union. Something unique. But why do we do it? Because it is trust. One state, one vote, one common institution like a court that rules upon every state on the basis of common rules in the same manner. Trust is built only by application of rules. That's the first step to do. First remark, and the second remark concerning the first question about the role of Germany after the Brexit. The German foreign ministry recently said, yes, we are in a new position, but we didn't seek it for it. It's not what we wanted. And the clear German position is not to be a hegemon, because we can't afford it. We have 9 neighboring states, and we want to be in peace with them, because a hegemon is always somebody who is not liked or loved by the neighbors. Is always somebody who is disliked. That's why it's our intrinsic interest of Germany to be part of the European Union, to make common decisions with France and other countries. We don't want to be alone. It's not a geopolitical thinking. It's really a thinking about the future and our position in Europe and in the world. We can't be alone, and we do. And the second point is only we have in the foreign ministry in Germany the new process. It's called review process. So we are about to review our foreign policy. You mentioned it in the white book for strategy, but also on the international level. We want to be more active on international level, because till now, because of our past, we're restrained from any implications in military actions. But now we also, forced by France, we see the point that we have to be more implicated, but it doesn't really create this balance between France and Germany. France remains the main military power in our Vietnam. And we want to invest, on the other hand, even more in the European Union, because it's our interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ingenlath. Thank you, Professor Florent Parmentier, Professor Dmitry Suslov. Thank you, Ilya. I think we all highly enjoyed this conference. It was very intense, full of food for thought and things that we now need to do. So let us thank all of our honorable guests one more time.